Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and joining me today is Mitch Nugent, director, actor, and producer, and the executive artistic producer of Prima Theatre. Founded in 2010, Prima Theatre is situated in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and is home to boutique musicals, theatrical concerts, and special events. Guest performers have included Stephen Schwartz, Billy Porter, Alice Ripley, Jason Robert Brown, and Shoshana Bean, to name just a few. Prima were in the midst of their 10th season when the shutdown happened, but it has not stopped the company from innovating and creating theatrical experiences for its audiences. Welcome, Mitch.
Well, hello. I'm pumped to be with you.
We're very excited to find all about what you've been up to these past few months.
It's been a journey.
I can't wait to hear about it. So before we get into that, can you tell us about the world of Prima Theatre before the shutdown?
Yeah, so we were for about 8 years a roving nomadic organization, and specifically focused on invigorating people's lives with fresh theatrical experiences. And so we were at a number of venues, about 15 of them, over that first 8 years. And we started actually in the Great Recession, which set us up well to be resourceful going into the current circumstances. And after 8 seasons, we had the great opportunity to get into our own venue, thanks to a number of folks in the community really believing in the power of fresh theatrical experiences. And so we had our first year last year, calendar year and season being a calendar year, and then life changed. So we got a full season in.
One whole season.
Yeah, yes, within our own space. And so, be careful when you think you've arrived. Things can shift. So that's been, the history of the organization was we really felt like there was a flavor of the arts that our community and our artists in the area were interested in experiencing. And so we're kind of that off-Broadway house, basically, for Central Pennsylvania.
That's amazing. And I'm so sorry that the pandemic got in the way of your second season.
Well, it's interesting, yeah, how that plays out, because it certainly creates more sleepless nights, and yet in some ways refines our organization to be focused on the things, the core values that define what our purpose is and how we engage the community in this art form. And so to some degree, I am grateful for it, and yet certainly would never, like any challenging circumstance, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. And yet for arts and culture, this is such an opportunity.
What would you define as Prima's purpose?
Yeah, and it's to invigorate people's lives with fresh theatrical experiences. And so I hear about some companies that say, I think of I mentioned one big one that a lot of folks have a variety of feelings about, but Chick-fil-A's mission is to bring chicken to the people, which is an interesting thing, because most of us, including myself, would think, well, it's to get people to their buildings to buy chicken. But when they say it's to bring chicken to the people, reality hit when I heard that during the pandemic, that invigorating people's lives with fresh theater doesn't necessarily have to happen in the confines of a traditional space. As you know, the art form has existed in a variety of manners and over thousands of years. So our understanding of what that has to look like in contemporary culture perhaps is at the corner of a significant shift.
It's very exciting, and it changes the potential for theater and what we can see online and the world of theater in general. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, what are your big insights? I mean, what have you felt like that you've seen that has been, potentially transformative?
The belief that filmed theater is a thing is
Mhm.
a massive shift, particularly in the United States. there was a huge resistance to filming theater and making it available to people. There's fear that it will affect ticket sales. There's a fear that there's the belief that it's not theater at all once you film it, that it has to be live, it has to be in the room. And that belief has shifted. And I think we can thank Hamilton a lot for that.
Sure.
The huge response to it, and just the huge response to theater online in general. I don't think people in certainly the Broadway community were expecting an audience for this kind of stuff.
Mm.
So that leads me to ask about, was Calling All Kates the current production when the pandemic hit?
Yes.
So can you talk, what happened?
Yeah, I mean, we were starting to get sort of the rumblings in the closing week. And so we were able to finish out the run of this tremendous new musical that felt like Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt met at the Gilmore Girls. And just a joyful piece to sort of end one era of life in America um, for our patrons. And within a matter of just a few days, we're starting to make phone calls to find out, does insurance cover pandemics? So within less than 2 weeks, we were pivoting towards how can we fulfill our mission within new confines. So yeah, that we had by doing a bunch of fresh work, it has allowed us to do some things that other organizations just don't have the legal capacity to do. Also, the relationships to some of the Broadway guest artists that we had in the past allowed for certain people to be in my cell phone Rolodex more quickly. And so we just had some resources at hand of some of the writers to say, hey, like, this is such an opportunity to get your work seen by a broader audience. What on top of it, like, we're working with at that point a lot of non-union performers. So the archival work, we had filmed almost all of our productions for the last 10 years. So working with a load of non-union performers who are pros in their own right or have gone on to be equity or what have you. I mean, we just had this great load of HD footage that we had been getting multi-camera shot for years. And the realities were the rights companies had no interest in that kind of, like, we could shoot those kind of things for marketing purposes. And so we had some of this footage that we would never release publicly based on legal confines. And then the rights companies are going, well, now maybe things change. And that was certainly, it was a necessity to go through all the proper channels for some of the work in which was, owned by the grand rights companies. Those, we certainly have archival footage legally that we weren't allowed to release. But some of those new musicals or the theatrical concerts, I mean, we were able to basically put within a month an entire Netflix library out.
That has certainly been a big change, that the licensing companies have said, oh, yes, streaming is okay now.
To try to, the rules have been really so constricted for years. And the realities is that, I mean, they're trying to protect the artist, they're trying to protect the bottom line. I completely understand that. And yet, we were already talking about the industry being something that felt like some folks, declaring it as a dying art form, perhaps because we're not providing access to this, right? Like, you think of movie trailers, give away the entire movie, and still people go and see movies, right? Or did, right? And will. So we find like we can in some ways give people a taste of the work if we film it well, if we don't do it halfway. Clearly there's an audience for it. Like you mentioned, from a Hamilton standpoint, you can, if you do it well, you can get the essence of the experience, and when it comes back live, there's an audience for it. But what we do now matters. How well we do that.
So you said you had footage from 10 years ago. What led you to you said archival recordings, but why were you recording even then?
So we had footage for 10 years of shows, mostly for marketing purposes. that we would want to have, that moment of a song that we could put out with our ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC rights, which are the music rights to specific songs that are outside of a musical. And then when our brand rights through an organization like Samuel French or MTI or Broadway Licensing, when those contracts would allow, we would film the show in its entirety. And so we were always interested in getting the rights for that because it felt like this was material that we were so proud of the work we were doing. We wanted artists to be able to access that. Most of the time, they would have to come into the Prima office to even watch it. And that game has changed in so many rights. Now, there's still shows that, I went knocking on the rights company doors and calling and being able to talk to that amazingly. Some of those brand rights companies were opening up their vice president of the legal affairs in conversation because they're trying to figure it out at the same time the theaters are trying to figure it out. And so there was some great conversations, and some folks and some artists didn't feel comfortable releasing their goods, or their managers were frightened about sort of opening up every opportunity that perhaps their work wouldn't be honored, or will people want to buy the rights down the line? But it seems like the gates have been generally opened, and who knows what the future looks like, as we all are sort of watching and seeing what's happening around the world of what does the future of the arts really look like.
Yep. When do we get that magical vaccine?
Yeah, and also to see, always looking for, like, it seems like that any, you think of like the iPhone is the mix between a computer and a phone, like this hybrid model that didn't exist before. And I have conversation quite a bit in those sleepless nights of going, where is that next major innovation? Where's the light bulb moment between what we are seeing from a digital standpoint and these, in some ways, like there's going to be some melding and trying to figure out what that looks like. There's a lot of ideas. There's people doing online theater that is live or is the stream content or what have you. There's a myriad of ways in which people are trying to take theater forward in this new era. And I'm not sure I have seen the answer. You go, oh, that's it. That's the future. But at this point, it feels like folks in positions of like mine are throwing a lot of things at the wall, like purposely curating and crafting things, and sort of shipping them out to the community and going, does this have an audience?
Stick?
Yes. Yeah. We, as an organization, to fulfill that mission of invigorating people's lives through these theatrical experiences, we're throwing out a few different ideas, and some of them worked great, and some of them nobody seems to care. So we're going, okay. You almost have to, like, there's risk involved. And at this point, we need to try a few things as well as we can and see what sticks.
Something I'm very passionate about is that filmed live theater is an alternative to live theater. It's never going to replace it, because people always want that live person experience. But having said that, what do you think when you film, say, Calling All Kates, you filmed that show, and then now it's been released online or is available online through Prima? What is the object that is now that film? Is it theater, or is it film? Is it something else?
Yeah, there's been quite a load of discussion about. I've heard a lot of artistic leaders say, well, that's not theater. And that makes, just sharing my personal opinion, that makes me feel uncomfortable. No, you're not in the room. And yet, when I watch a documentary on arena concerts, there is an essence of feeling that you're connected to that experience. And so it may not be the totality of it, but your heart rises up. You get some of those same emotional, some of the same things are happening within your body, not to the 100% or of perhaps being in the room, but to say, I have a hard time with that concept of saying, well, that's not theater. I mean, folks, it depends on how religious you want to be about it, how dogmatic you want to be about it. And to be honest, it's like I don't think those of us that are producing it, to some degree, holding on to what was is not helpful at this point. I was like, I don't think we have time to be stuck in that, but rather perhaps instead of looking back and going, well, what are the things that we're mourning the loss of? Could we be just looking forward to say, well, what's next? And that doesn't mean that live is going anywhere. It's crucial and certainly the sort of the ultimate experience. But I think you have a great point in saying, hey, this has a place.
Absolutely. And we've been filming theater since we invented cameras. And we've been performing since we became humans, and maybe even before that.
Yeah,
And so it is
yeah.
exciting to think about what is the next step in that iteration.
Yeah, there's been a number of ideas. There's one New York composer did a bunch of New York Music Theater Festival work back in the day, and he had an idea about like there needing to be sort of that the label for albums of musicals that don't happen in New York, but that people should hear, they should experience. And in his mind, he's not obviously wasn't thinking about the film because in some ways that is like off limits category, right? Outside of bootlegs. But to think that there's been these sort of inkling concepts of what would it look like. Imagine the artists that never their work may never make it into Manhattan, but some of the best work isn't necessarily happening in the confines of specific locations or cities. I mean, I've seen some of the best theater I've seen has been, in the Midwest or on the West Coast, and it never goes to New York, or it's so far off Broadway that it never gets noticed, and yet can be the best art if it's filmed and the world can see it. It almost in some way the access changes the game.
And it changes the power dynamic because it's
Mm.
this idea, this old idea that Broadway is the best, and there is so much wonderful theater happening outside of New York that New Yorkers don't get to see, and the people outside of those towns don't get to see. So that's why like film theater allows us access to those things, and hopefully the pandemic, the positive that will come out of that is that people will see these great works that, you know, like you said, don't get a bigger stage time. So that brings me back to Calling All Kates. I'm very curious, do you have an in-house team that film your shows, or do you bring in a team for each production?
Yeah, we have the immense gift that is a volunteer that comes in with multi-camera to multiple theaters and because he cares about the arts and he does it out of the love for it. Um, and so for years, that's what it has been. Previous to that, there's a number of film companies in the area because Lancaster, PA is kind of in between Philly and DC and Baltimore and Pittsburgh. We're not, that far from. We're kind of a 3-hour drive from a lot of big cities. And so this area has a lot of film companies. And so previous to that, we had partnerships with a variety of film companies. But as a small, scrappy nonprofit, that wasn't sustainable. Specifically, that there wasn't a means in which to offer a ticketed uh, experience that you could stream something for a price point. And so at some point, we had to go. Oh, we might have to make this a volunteer experience. And so for years now, gentleman has been doing that. And so realistically, like there are videos that we have shot with on the 4K setting on an iPhone that have been, immensely successful for marketing campaigns. And nobody knows what, I mean, it's better than our SLR camera that we bought 6 years ago or so. Like there's so much that one can do if you have, in some ways, the right team behind it and a few pieces of technology. So, um, so often what we found is that it's mostly about the people that are passionate about what you do, and making asks of, do you have anybody in your network that can manage this? And I see folks, there's companies that are coming up, out of the woodworks to be able to offer this. But I look at small nonprofit organizations, I'm like, this is a great way to spend a lot of money that we don't all have, and it's not really necessary. Quality matters, the multi-camera shots, I think that matters for experiencing it in this kind of platform. But I do question, who's got the pro equipment that might just care about the art enough to participate.
Okay, so you have your team of volunteers. You hear rumblings that a shutdown might be happening. Calling All Kates was filmed before the shutdown was announced, or like it was going to be filmed anyway?
That's a good question. Where the timing happened, I think we schedule it to be filmed if we have the right to do so. Um, for that show specifically, I believe we had it filmed in the first or second week of the run. So it was already in process. I vaguely recall texting the gentleman about it, and usually it's like, well, we don't need this footage for a couple months. It's gonna sit in a Dropbox account and maybe used for a montage of our past history a year from now. Until we said, hey, any chance you could finish that in the next 48 hours? So, uh, and I think it wasn't foreign to him to understand why we were looking at that. And the writers, the book writer and the music writer, were seeing the arts potentially go into such a rough period of time. They said, "Yep, do what you need to do, get the work out there, and find if it's going to support." We utilize the online content to support out of work theater artists, as well as just keep this company thriving. And so that mission helped a lot of folks say, yep, I don't mind my content going towards supporting those kinds of causes.
So the shutdown happens, you have this content sitting in your Dropbox and gets edited. You get permission from Emily Goodson and Jeremy Schoenfeld
Yes.
and the actors in the show. And
Yes.
then what was the process to launching Prima Now, your online platform?
Trying to see what was happening in the industry. There was a number of folks looking at a variety of ways of doing it. We questioned about, I saw folks that were putting out content for free with a donate button, and instinct and some data told me that that wasn't really going to be the most effective route. And we were trying to figure out, how do we package these things? One of my passions is marketing. It's about influence. It's about it's as salesy as marketing can sound, and that dirty word. It's about helping move people in a direction, and it can be used for good. And so my question about, how could we package this content that we have in a way that could support the causes that these people care about. And when it's a side thing to push a donate button, I'm thinking, I don't know if I would do that. But if I knew I'm doing something good, I'm making an impact, and I'm going to get this library of content. So we just threw out as a team. We're a staff of 3 people. There was a lot of churning and ruminating on, how do we package this thing, which became Prima Now. And at first we knew we had about 4 or 5 shows or concerts that we made sure we were covering all the bases of rights and permissions and blessings from the artists and all that jazz. And then it turned into dozens of productions and content. Some of them that went out for a period of time. Jekyll and Hyde, Frank Wildhorn kindly gave us a few weeks of putting up that production. We were trying to figure out, how do we package this thing. One smart man said, this is the time for it to be about others. This is the time to be generous, not the time to be looking. I guess it's that concept of, like, when you're drowning, the natural thing to do is kind of hold tight, to grasp onto things and to bring other things underwater with you versus to calm down and float, think, process. So we took the time. We weren't the first people to come out with streaming content, but what we did do is think about it, look at what was going on in the world. What did we think was going to be the most effective route? And we were able to raise thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for out-of-work theater artists, and to help amidst a time where we were going to see, $100,000 gap. At that point, we only thought we were going to close for what, 30 days.
Yeah.
Uh, so we saw a huge, what seemed like an insurmountable financial gap that was coming, and the community and the world at large. And as you mentioned, like people seeing things in other countries. I mean, we were hearing from folks in Europe specifically that were so excited about seeing fresh work that they wouldn't otherwise experience. And so we were able to raise the money for those out-of-work theater artists, as well as to keep the lights on, at the theater, so that those out-of-work theater artists would actually have work when things return. So some folks, it's the natural thing to go, well, the theaters are going to be okay. Well, if we're in some ways thinking about the artists, we need to make sure that there's a place for them to get work when things return. So keeping the lights on is a fairly crucial task.
And has the Prima Now program, has that allowed you essentially to stay open?
It helped the first couple months for us to get a sense that things were going to be okay for the short term. None of us would have, we thought, okay, well, then we'll get back to our May programming and the fundraiser that's going to be in the spring, and our summer plans. We're going to, and then you start to sort of do cash flow planning and go, okay, well, looks like it might be June, July, August. Okay, we'll plan through August, and so it helped us through that first early phase when who knew what the government was going to do, right? And reality is none of those programs in which are out there are saving graces for the small nonprofit theaters. So it's also right now a platform in which we're asking questions about what does the future of that look like so did it, sort of fill all of our gaps? No. But what it is also offering is an opportunity for us to engage patrons and folks who may never otherwise experience our work. We're looking at what does it look like in this next upcoming season for us to package streaming shows, whether it's individual tickets or it's subscriptions, or it helps engage donors. It helps engage subscribers. What if we are providing, just like you would you watch if you were watching some sort of sporting event, and there's an after game analysis or what have you. What if some of this online content would allow us to offer folks who did see a show in person sort of the up in the dressing room, here's the lead actor sort of giving his play-by-play of the night, and so it becomes more of an overall experience than it is just something that's more boxed in.
Oh, that's exciting. I love, as an audience member, the idea of having like backstage access is very cool.
There's one night during a show run that might have a talk back with the cast. Well, if you can't attend that night, you're out of luck to get the insights. We're going to make that kind of content available. So these kind of streaming platforms, filmed live musicals, are obviously the meat. But then we ask, what's the rest of the meal around that? And I think there's going to be a full palette ahead. And we do need our broader community, our nation, to support the organizations as we reframe the very essence of what we do. Because as so many companies are having to think about, like, well, I was an architect firm for schools, but now that looks a lot different. We have to rethink. And so I think you're going to be seeing theaters. It'll be really interesting to see your podcast a year from now, and what kind of tales you'll be telling.
Yeah, you got me really excited with the idea of like the palette. It makes me think of like DVD sets and how in DVDs we used to get all these extras and there was commentary and backstage access and all kinds of fun stuff on a DVD package, which streaming content doesn't have a lot of. It's usually just the show. And so I love the idea that streaming could come with all those extras.
It's interesting because I did hear someone mention that the statistics with Disney Plus right now, listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I am hearing is that some of the statistics are that the documentaries on the behind the scenes of the Disney world are getting more viewership than was ever expected, and sometimes bigger than the main meat content. So folks are interested in sort of getting that exclusive look at things. And so, we're looking at how do we make some of that content that is only available to folks who are investing in the cause, and some of it available to the broader public, uh, for folks to learn about the art form, to be engaged. I was that kid who would never have been able to afford to go to Broadway constantly, but perhaps things like Calling All Kate's, a new musical that they feel like, okay, I can wrap my head around that. That's music that I would like to listen to. That this may be the way that a 12-year-old decides that they're going to invest their life in a creative way.
So many times I hear industry people talking about bootlegs being their in to theater, especially people that grew up outside of the major cities. And bootlegs were how they saw theater for the first time for many people. And whether we agree with bootlegs or not, they exist and they provide access to people. And what's so exciting about the pandemic is that, and with all this theater being made available online, is it's providing access in a way that we never have had. The fact that we can watch Hamilton for $6.99 when the average ticket was like $300, and now everyone can see it in a way that they couldn't before.
Yeah, and that's scary for the folks who are involved in the making of these things in terms of the boundaries, the systems in place. In some ways, all the walls come crashing down, and it can be fear-inducing, and it also can be so exciting to think of what that's gonna mean for access, but also that in some ways you get to build something new that may not have been working very well in the first place.
Well, we so often talk about theater as this egalitarian, all are welcome, we are equal in the theater, but not everyone, whether for money or physical distance or physicality, people with disabilities often can't get into an actual theater.
Hmm.
And so location and money and physical bodies, screening theater changes all of that.
That's awesome. You're certainly bringing some things to light that I haven't put enough time thinking through in terms of how that access can it was some ways when music came, when it was Spotify and all the streaming content that you could listen to music that otherwise may not play on the radio in your Kansas town, let's say, or what have you. Like perhaps our world can become a little bit smaller and more loving if we were able to connect a little bit further.
That's a beautiful and perfect transition into your next project to bring theater to people, Brave and Beautiful. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we had a concert that was on the schedule, and we recognized it hit us over the head with all that was happening in our world, specifically from Black Lives Matters and from COVID. That there's so much pain and distress and negativity that is in our world right now, and yet there's so much bravery and beauty that can get missed amidst the lens of some of the horror stories that are happening in our world. And it's not to dishonor some of those struggles that are going on. Those are real and important to embrace to work through. And so when we talk about bravery and beauty. It's about working through that and to see the bravery amidst the muck. And so we're doing a drive-in storytelling and concert experience that it's on the back of a giant flatbed truck with trussing and lighting and a baby grand piano. Because it's big, it can have a full band on it, and we can still socially distance and with in-ear monitors and the full get out. And we're also going to be taking that act and parading it through town, like the Rolling Stones and U2 did in Manhattan back in the day. And so it's just a way that under what was in Pennsylvania the red phase, the most closed phase, we were trying to figure out how do we take this to the people, and so we were looking at we can put it on a truck and bring it to people's houses. One author said during all of this, thing that hit really early on was they said, this is not the time to be efficient. Efficient will not be effective. And the thing that it was like, we've been in a world that's moving so fast that the most efficient thing is to shoot out an email to thousands of people that's not personalized at all, that we all know is BS, right? Like, it's a sales pitch email versus the call to a single human. And so we figure out, what does it look like for theater to be that connected on an individual basis? It may be, we're exploring what does that look like. So for Brave and Beautiful, it's the music of Beyonce and Adele and Sarah Bareilles and Aretha Franklin with local and national stories from the last few months. So amidst COVID and Black Lives Matters, these local and national stories that are embodying the bravery and beauty that we're seeing in our world, and then connecting some of the music of those great singer-songwriters that fit the bill.
I love that it's very female driven too.
Yes, that was the original intent of the piece. Was that was going to be pretty gender focused and about female empowerment, and that still is true of this work, and certainly. We have a number of causes and issues to work through as a society. We're going to do them all at the same time.
We're going to fix the world with this one concert.
Yes. Yeah. But when we look back at what the New Deal did, in the early 1900s, and the way, the position and the power of the arts, specifically when you make it available to the masses in an accessible way, how it transformed pop culture, politics, and prejudice. To imagine what your focus is on these on filmed live musicals. Imagine what that could look like for our society when we talk about what does pop culture look like, what does our politics look like, what does prejudice look like. Change can happen.
Absolutely. And it keeps bringing to mind this idea. I'm picturing your cast on the back of the truck, and it brings to mind like medieval troubadours traveling around on a wagon.
Yes. Yeah. My wife had said, realistically, like capitalism, just like I feel like, so much there's that connection between like theater and organized religion. Like in terms of you're creating community, you're creating an experience, you're moving people emotionally and spiritually and what have you. And we feel like as uncomfortable of perhaps connecting those two things, we say, well, that may look different in different generations. And theater and capitalism may have had a relationship that needs to shift. And the scary thing is, as a producer, running an organization, is the reality is like I have a core value of smashing the box, of seeing where the status quo is and breaking it down, and then realizing that sometimes when the status quo is benefiting you, that you're going to have to go through your own pain in the process to to do what is in the best interest of the greater good. Check back in a year to see if I'm feeling how I'm feeling about that.
Let's take this optimism. I love it. Let's keep celebrating that.
Will Brave
Oh,
and Beautiful be filmed?
uh, yes, yes. I had to think about that. Because it's still, we're still, you still navigate like going through the check marks of all of the rights boxes, making sure that we are, honoring the authors of the work. We have set the circumstances up for that. So yeah, I think you'll be seeing Brave and Beautiful ahead if I make that possible. And I think a number of other works as we head into 2021. One of the questions that's now being asked in our rights agreements is we need to be able to stream this. How can we make that possible if people can't see this in space? Or what if we need to give people the choice? So let's say something changes and in the world, and it's a week before the show and you plan to see it in theater, and now you're not feeling so comfortable about that. What if we need to provide the flexibility for people to be able to go from seeing it to streaming it, and then if they want to rewatch it a year from now, to engage that creative concept that might inspire some other project that they're working on in their business world. So everything ahead in 2021 has new filters at the front lines of even considering material. Is it safe? Is it streamable? And also, can we produce this with less than 50 people in the house if we had to?
Yeah.
Which is a wild set of new filters to consider.
How are you rehearsing with your performers and keeping them socially distanced?
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes that means doing things outdoors. Um, the currently a lot of the work we've been doing is home concerts, so bringing that kind of experience into people's safe spaces. And so those are often being like out on people's patio, and telling stories and providing music. We're obviously musically focused, so that those main ingredients to the art form of storytelling and theater are storytelling and music for us are taking new forms in these home concerts where people are gathering their closest friends in wide spaces, and doing them that way. So performers have been we have our own theater. We can, when we only have 3 or 4 performers, I mean, they can be separated from the pianist and what have you, but primarily we are choosing material moving forward that has a minimal number of people involved as far as what's on stage or in the band for proximity's sake. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we say to musicians that would be in the pit orchestra that they're no longer needed. That's not the plan. But what if we have to record that so that we can engage these folks and provide a live orchestral experience with tracks that are well produced, where we still engage the artists. We can provide a live singing experience or what have you. So it's everything has to get rethought.
Welcome to 2020.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's I do believe, like you mentioned about being optimistic, that we are going to see um, uh, more fresh work because of this. Um, because when I think there's a place for the work that you see. I see a number of theaters moving their seasons, one year ahead. Perhaps it's just our core values as an organization, but I feel like when the world has changed, I can't justify within our organization just taking our stuff and moving forward. Like, too much has shifted. So it is changing how we present what we do, what we are going to present. I guess I just can't, in my spirit, justify pretending like nothing happened. People are going to need joy. We're going to need escapes, but we are also going to need reflection and what have you ahead. And so the kind of work that we're looking at, we had a plan, and that got thrown out in multiple levels, to say what is our patrons, what does our world need right now.
And that's the best theater that is alive and in the moment and speaking to us today.
So hopefully you'll see film live musicals that will probably we are likely not going to be live streaming our shows, but we are going to film them multi-camera, top audio, then we'll master them multi-camera, and then we're going to try to get them out a few weeks. That's the plan currently. See where that is in a month from now. But the idea that just as if you could see it in the movies, you could see it in the theater, and then it's going to end up out on streaming at some point, right? Like it's going to be out on DVD at some point. We're going to try to get that out as fast as we can, while there's interest in material hot.
It's so exciting. I cannot wait to see what comes next.
Well, thanks for just focusing on a part of the art form that is starting to make some noise.
I really hope so. So I have a few questions that I ask every guest, and they're quick questions. So whatever first comes to mind is good. So favorite musical?
Oh, I feel like the people around me could answer that better than I. I spent what brought me to the arts was Jesus Christ Superstar. And I have a love-hate relationship with material. So, gosh, that's such a hard question. It's almost like, how in some of those music platforms where it tells you what you've been listening to a lot. That's what we need, like an algorithm to answer this.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I grew up on Jesus Christ Superstar and Rent and all those rock musicals, and so, but also like Chess. That was this one that when I was feeling a little bit angry at the world, I would just put on like Nobody's Side from Chess, and that was the answer.
You're like the glam rock musical.
Yes.
That explains your love affair with Jeremy Schoenfeld.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. I saw him. Goodness, in my early 20s, and was like this rock star, manly man doing Broadway rock musicals. Yes, he scared the life out of me when I first saw him. He's gonna beat me up. So hopefully this line of film live musical will make work like his more readily available.
Absolutely. So on that line, do you have a favorite filmed live musical?
The best filmed live musical.
Or your favorite. It doesn't have to be the best. Your favorite. Something that you put on that gives you comfort, brings you joy.
I have trouble rewatching things in general. I enjoyed when the final Broadway cast of Rent had their that film come out.
Radical Media.
Yes, that reminded me, like Hamilton, it
Same
reminded
company.
me. Yes, yes, reminded me of the power of what we do, and in some ways, like sometimes when you're creating it, you kind of get lost in it all. Then to see great artists doing their work, like there it is.
As a fellow Rent head, I quite agree.
Yeah. So that one, and I really enjoyed the Chess concert production because it helped with Idina and Adam Pascal and Josh Groban. That was something I just happened to run by on yes one time. And there's nothing like magical about how it was filmed or what have you, but it also brought to attention a show that might otherwise never see the light of day.
That's great. I love that. You called them films, and we touched on this earlier. Is it theater? Is it film? What should we call it? What should we call this entity when we film theater?
Film.
But is it cinema? Is it the same as like watching Save It Private Ryan? Is watching Rent filmed live on Broadway the same as watching Rent the movie?
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between when you talk about filmed live musicals. There is a difference between that and the rent film that was, produced with the original cast. Those are two different things. There's a cinematic experience, and I'm not enough of a cinema buff to be able to wrap my language around it. What I would hesitate to do is to tell people that it's not. I don't think that's helpful. So when you say like film live musicals, it's almost like it's interesting because from a title alone, kind of going like we don't necessarily have the language for this yet, and let's be okay with that discomfort. In that this is what's accessible at the moment, and to become comfortable with the discomfort of the moment.
It's very
So
zen.
I,
Lean
I
into
would
the
rather,
discomfort.
yeah, I would rather not. I'd rather uh, not put a box around it than than to set up a structure in which is potentially unhelpful at the
Next question. Where do you stand on bootlegs?
moment. Oh, oh gosh. Oh man. As someone who has a high value for smashing the box, and which is my way of defining that the status quo is something that I'm always questioning. When there were so many confines to the experience of theater, that did bother me. And that continues to be like, well, why are we setting up all of these restrictions to some degree? And there are good reasons for some of it. Some just happen to be that people are protecting perhaps past systems that are unhelpful at the moment. So I think that has there been bootlegs that I have experienced that have been helpful to experiencing the arts as a kid and what have you? Yep. Um, and um, and that there's some of that excitement I remember as a teenager going, oh, we can see this show. Wow, how did they get access to that? My hope is similar, to medical marijuana. Let's go there. You start
Yes,
to
this
see
is an excellent analogy.
you start to see some states, some progressive states, start to question, or leaders start to say, well, how we regulate this, if this is something that, how much harm is this doing? Are we creating uh, um, systems and rules that are doing more harm than good? Those kind of questions, I don't think I necessarily have the answers to, but I do think that they're good questions to ask. And so I think of, from some ways, within the restrictions in which have been placed around an industry that it has had its struggles, I do think we have now been forced to ask some questions of what if we set some regulations around filmed musicals that help protect the artists, to honor them and to lift them up, and the people surrounding it behind the scenes, rather than put people into doing things in the corners that are less than beneficial for the greater good.
That is the best analogy I have ever heard, and I want to put it on my website.
Ugh.
Filmed
Abortion
live
or medical
musicals. We are
marijuana?
like legal, we are like medical marijuana. Get your card here. Okay,
Oh,
last two
man.
questions. What shows do you wish had been filmed?
Wow. There's some shows that like are moving to film cinematically, like Dear Evan Hansen, um, that I think would be fun to see theatrically, not in a bootleg, like done well. Some of the great work that you don't have to go to the New York Library to actually see it. I remember seeing, obviously I'm into the rock musicals. I went a few times to see Tick, Tick, Boom off Broadway by Keen Company, and heard that it was getting filmed, and thinking I gotta go to a library in a city in which I do not reside, and sit there for a few hours, and then but I can't, like, that's that. So work like that, Keen Companies was just like the bare bones, like focusing on the storytelling and um, the real grittiness that is behind some of the greatest stories, but that economically doesn't make sense for somebody to release on some giant platform. That's a piece that I would love to get my hands on.
I imagine there is a huge market for Tick Tick Boom, particularly all the rent heads out there. People love anything Jonathan Larson, so I would hope that if there is something like that they would release it. And final question, what would you like to see filmed in the future?
Jeremy Schonfeld's concept about a platform in which non-New York musicals could get heard, I think is in imagining that in a film sense, I think could be an amazing future asset. I think the answer, I think, is the work that may never make it to New York and could be the next greatest thing. The Six, like those kinds of, it'd be interesting to see a show like Six in some sort of, I don't know, would that be fun to watch?
Oh yes,
Sure.
I've been keeping like fingers crossed that Six will get released online, because they announced the drive-in theater in the UK, and that got nixed. And I'm like, come on, release the film. But because it's probably going to open on Broadway when we're allowed to reopen, I don't think they will. But I want them to release it.
Yes. Gosh. Yeah, some of those works. I think there's more of them out there. I think it's the thing that I would love to see released in the future is the work in which we do not know, that the work that is unseen, that is under the radar, that requires a platform to showcase it. And I know that some of those, I think it's Broadway Now is basically making an appeal out for such, to broaden the platform. But just like the early days of the internet, AOL or Yahoo, may have had the first idea. We'll see who really brings it to life.
Well, there's new platforms already popping up in the UK. There's Scene Saver, which is for off West End and fringe theatre. And Broadway On Demand has started streaming sort of unknown, smaller scale productions as well.
Well, it sounds like I need to go make a phone call.
I'll send you links after.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Mitch. This was so much fun and so wonderful to meet someone who's so passionate about theater and passionate about theater in a way that is uplifting to humanity. It's really beautiful to see.
Well, thanks for your time.
Of course. Where can folks find Prima Theatre?
primatheater.org is the best way to engage what's going on in our world.
And make sure to sign up. I'm just bringing it up. There are 2 access options. You can purchase a superhero pass, which is that $100? Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
So that will give a $100 grocery card to an out-of-work performer or theater artist, and will give you access to all the content streaming online. And then there's various price points for the no-show show, and that will give you access to all the content that is streaming, 2 musicals currently, and a bunch of concerts as well. Thank you so much, Mitch. It was so great to talk with you today, and we'll catch you soon. Filmed Live Musicals is a labor of love, and we'd like to thank everyone who makes it possible.
Thank you to our patrons Josh Brandon, Mercedes Esteban, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, Al Monaco, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, and Beck Twist for your support. If you'd like to support Filmed Live Musicals, please like and review on your podcast app. Find us on Twitter at Musicals on Screen and on Facebook at Filmed Live Musicals. If you'd like to support the site financially, you can find us at patreon.com/musicals on screen. No matter what level you're able to pledge, you'll receive early access to written content and early access to this very podcast. Visit www.filmedlivemusicals.com to learn more. Thanks for listening.